Thanks, Chairman. Just for some of you who don't know, just I give you a guidelines. What was the guidelines given to the architects for this presentation? The format is, Chairman has already discussed. The guidelines for the presentation is that the contributing architect will articulate or critique the studio objective and the outline of the current syllabus and will propose his or her own objectives and outlines as an alternate. The contributing architect will also propose his or her way of handling the studio for the semester. So at the end, I think BOS is expecting these two things: a revised objective and outline for the studio, contributing architect's way of handling a studio for that semester, and also typically no introduction of the speakers will be made. Most of the introduction is given, a short introduction is given in this pamphlet. And another important thing is no discussion is permitted at the end of each presentation. However, at the end of each presentation, the participants can forward their questions in writing, and the questions will be taken up during the discussion at the end of the day. So to start off with, we have the first speaker of the day, who is Vijay, Architect Vijay. His topic is third semester studio. Vijay, Architect Vijay, yes, please.
Morning. I've been given the task to start the architect's presentations. I think Dr. Rajan, I think it was a very relevant set of points that you had made. And thanks to the Board of Studies for actually getting all of us here together to at least talk about what we think the design studio should be. I will talk from my experience, of course, going back, like Dr. Rajan said, to my education and the experience that I've had mostly at Arvik School of Architecture. I have taught all the way from the 3rd, 4th, 7th, 6th thesis, urban design. So overall, all these things influence me in what I think should come into the third semester architecture studio. I also feel that, all of us would want to try and package everything in a very crisp and clear fashion, saying that this is what the design studio should be. When Bharat came and asked if I could discuss one of the studios, he also specified broadly that we can't change too much of the structure. Given to me, I would think that the way the studios are structured is too studio oriented, in the sense that you're actually most of the time in the studio critiquing the students and the students doing their work, and they go back home and, like Dr. Rajan said, after 3, 4, 5, 7 hours a day, they go back home, and when you meet again for the next studio session, not much really has progressed. And partly that may be because we have lost, losing this culture of hanging out. You would want to hang out in Facebook and maybe in other social networks, but why not hang out in the School of Architecture? And that, I feel, is extremely critical, and that's where the culture of interaction, thinking, just being there changes and works on the students. It gets into the student. So I feel, given the choice, I would actually disrupt the whole thing and say, okay, let's not, especially in the third semester, once they have some nuance as to what form is, space is, and maybe what architecture is notionally, maybe then we should start this whole process not in the studio, but rather outside the studio. I still remember that one architect in the US, I think there were other examples. Sam Mockbee had something called a rural design studio, and And this was, I think, he used to teach in Memphis, Tennessee. It was a very, not really the big school, not Ivy League. But what they would do is the students would go and camp in a village, not maybe for a long extended period of time, maybe 2 weeks sometimes, 4 days sometimes, and they would take up projects there and build with their own hands. And you should see some of those projects, they're incredible, and what you learn out of that is not an abstraction. You actually have to deal with people who are going to live there, who have certain specific requirements, they have everyday, day-to-day activities. And so I think if we can nurture that kind of thing, it will be wonderful, where we take the students away from this wonderfully comfortable place called studio, where they have one desk and they come and draw and they can nicely share their stuff. Whereas I wish we could disrupt that. But given this constraint that Bharat has asked us to follow broadly, whatever is there, we can't disrupt too much. I prepared something here. So, I think this slide is just to provoke you to thinking as to, whether what we have as a structure really works for our context. I'll leave you in that. So these are the stated objectives. I really also decided not to completely take away these objectives. They seem to make sense to me. To understand the meaning of cultural and physical context of a built environment and techniques of reading such context, that would be wonderful, but I think it's too much of a challenge for these kids at that stage. But regardless, I think it would be important to kind of share experiences with the students and experience things together, walk around the city, walk around different buildings, walk around landscapes, and understand what they are able to relate to, whether it's a cultural notion, whether it's a notion about So the second one is a little problematic, to isolate the various, the word isolate the various factors of the context which influence the design of the built environment. I think without getting at that word, what the intent is to sort of understand what are the various factors that come into play and try to give some clarity as to how each of these factors overlap and influence the space that you live in and what you're going to design. Is my voice echoing? Maybe I'll put this on. Hello? This is off already. No? Let me speak on. Yeah. This clearer? Yeah, thanks. The third objective is, of course, about placemaking. So in terms of placemaking, I think that is, again, a difficult notion. Maybe the first one and the last point are the same. So this slide, Mario Miranda's slide, sort of gives an understanding of, what you're challenging the student's mind with. So. So there are 4 questions to ponder about, I think, before we actually, before we start assuming that the student knows all these things, before we bombard them with stuff. So the first one is, I think, what do they know about, what have they learned about architecture? What do they know about architecture? They have had 2 semesters in which they've had to cover various subjects. And what kind of exposure to architecture do they have? Fresh from school, you have certain notions about architecture. Not everybody really knows when they're coming to, in fact, not everybody selects architecture for architecture's sake, and they just feel that it's not engineering and they come into the college, and really, what is that understanding of architecture? I think some of these things would be addressed in the first and second semester, studios and other subjects. But regardless, I think that's something we have to understand before we define a third semester studio. Then what do they understand about the design process? What is the design process? I mean, because I think until this point of time, to the first 2 semesters, they're really given other tasks. And of course, the second semester has a design project, but really it's like an open-ended thing. They just first attempt at actually designing something. So really one should have a discussion on what the design process should be. And the last one, of course, how do they represent these ideas? I mean, really, I mean, if you ask me, even now I struggle to represent my design ideas. It's the most difficult thing to do, and through this mode of representation, you're actually synthesizing your own ideas. So, can we get them to do that, and how do we get them to do that? Is the fourth question I pose. So, I would be comfortable with the other mic. I'm sorry, just. Yes. All right. So, I can use this. So, okay, fine. So they've covered already, in building construction, roof forms, I would say. In structures, they've sort of maybe got a notion by this time as to how a structure needs to stand and be stable. Very rudimentary. And then in history of architecture, they've kind of understood historical context. I think mainly European monuments, that too, and Hindu temples. Really, they've not really discussed, settlements so much. Not really streetscape, maybe neighborhood and building itself. In graphics, they've just sort of understood perspective drawing the second semester, and they've just probably started drawing freehand, except for a few students who already draw well, how to really draw a building or a space or an element or a column, and then they've been taught a little bit about writing, model making, carpentry, of course art appreciation, surveying. I think they've sort of been taught technical surveying, really how to sense a site intuitively is something I don't think they've been taught yet. And then some input during the course of the third semester. All the grey ones are the ones which are being taught parallelly, concurrently with the third semester. So RCC roofs are being done, finishes are being done, concrete structures are being done, Hindu temples are being taught, and building services are being taught. And of course, they'll be learning for the first time about something called climatology, and so how climate influences and how technically you understand climate. So, and then what kind of exposure to architecture do they have? I mean, they have some notion of forms and spaces, right? Monuments, cultural objects belong to a place, but they got to understand that in some cases this whole thing is displaced from any context. It's just like a plonk, like a satellite building, or some place very integrated to a place. They've also understood that these buildings don't stand by themselves. There are a lot of services and systems coming into place. Parallelly, they understand that because they're being taught sanitation systems, plumbing systems, electrical. So, I mean, they start looking at the building as a system, maybe, and so it's engineered. So you have to engineer a building. Then they also have to sort of start understanding, I think through the process of the third semester, not before this, that there's a response to climate that buildings have to have, or what you study, you can see that there is some response, good or bad. This building has glass on the west side and so on. So I guess so that discussion has to happen in the class. And so lastly, they also understand that there are various modes of representation. What all can I do? I mean, I think it is up to the studio team to make sure that they use all these skills and they reinforce and reiterate that on the student, that you have to draw, and you have to show them how to draw in the studio. You can't just expect them to draw. So you have to draw. There should be one maybe workshop where you show, okay, this is how you draw by hand. This is how you draw a freehand sketch. Although that's been taught outside of the context, you're going to draw their project for them. And so it has to be that kind of one-to-one involvement, and as these classes grow into 30, 40, 50 students, I don't know how we're going to do it, and studio teams are getting shrunk from 4 to 3 to 2 people. Now 2 people handling 40 students, 45 students is an extremely difficult task, and so especially if you have to have a one-to-one interaction. So I think, the other big constraint I feel is that now that we have 2 shifts in most colleges, nobody has a place of their own. They all have nomadic desks, they sit here, sit there sometimes, and they just don't have a place for themselves. And all the studio shots that I've seen on the internet, just to go through, thinking, what do the various studios have around the world? All of them are full of, information in front of the student. They have a laptop, but they have printouts of photocopies of various things, some written stuff, some doodles, their own plans, everything is in front of them. If that information is not in front of them all the time when they're designing, and you can't see that, then that whole process is completely flawed. So I think one request I would have to the Board of Studies and all the colleges here is that somehow make these studios structured like an architecture studio where you can have a place of your own. If you're going to talk place making, you should have a place in the studio first of all, to know that this is my place. I can put up all this stuff and it completely comes back to me every time I go there. And that spirit of architectural place is missing in the studio, and I think we should try and get back there. Okay, I'm sorry to that. So then the third thing, what they understand about the design process is that I think we should assume that they don't know anything. And so it is very important to be very sensitive and introduce these aspects. It's not anything new, but if you talk about the site, we don't talk about it as an analysis initially, because if you fill their minds with site analysis, you have to do it this, and they lose that intuitive understanding of the site. So how do they walk and experience through the site? So site analysis initially has to be an experience of sensing, gathering, locating the place in a historical perspective, a social perspective. So I think, I don't know how to translate this into material that can be useful for each studio team, but I think a broad notion should be that not to push them towards an analytical understanding of the site initially. It should be intuitive. And then gradually, as their project moves further through the 4th or 5th week or 6th week in the same semester, as they learn climatology and the analytical and technical understanding of climate to building, they could be encouraged to analyze their projects, so on and so forth. Now the type is a very convenient thing for people at this, for the lay person. If you say a school, they know what it is. If you say a hospital, they know what it is. This is no. But at the same time, if we establish the type as a very strong structural boundary for the student, then we fail, because then how do you get them to think critically about the basic notion of the type? So I think in a way, I think if you start taking, let's say, a project, suppose I've kind of given an example later of a school, for example, in this semester. I think school is good in semester because they're fresh from school, they have very personal notions about what their school was and how it worked, etc.
Just 2 minutes.
Okay, fine. Then I have only 2 minutes, I'm sorry. Okay, so type is something that we should look at. Then landscape, I think it's very important at this stage to talk about landscape as sound, smells, trees, materials. We lost all that, and so the relationship to the building, to the land is should come and get ingrained to them now. The other issues are there, adjacency, scale, which I think everybody does. Of course, then last thing is how they represent their ideas, or how they should instead. So let's say sketching, collage, write-up, study models, drawing, presentation. But each of these, I think, has comes in a particular stage of the semester. And so the first move should be sketching. You should just not ask them to do anything else, no write-up, nothing. Sketching and writing on the sketch. And then the collage as a medium, whether it's a collage, the video collage, or a paper collage, doesn't matter, but that captures the space as a phenomena. It's not really an object, so on and so forth. The write-ups, all these should be coming through as modes of representation for them. So then I just have 3 more slides. So I set out an example of a project for a school so that I can structure the semester. And why a school? Because it's still fresh in their minds, they have personal experiences of the school, they can critique it because they're outside of it now and they're not within the environment. And so we set out three main objectives, I call them. That you have to start understanding what is the teaching method or a philosophy behind the school. Before you tell them, okay, this is the program, right? 12 classrooms, one auditorium. You start them thinking about what the school, where it started, what is in the mind of the people who run the school, etc., etc. And what is the site, landscape, location of the school, and then how to communicate these. These are three objectives through the process. So, 2-3 more slides. Now the design process and structure, I think it's very simple. I have not disrupted that. It's the same format: introduction and site study first, then case studies, concept development, schematic development, development of design, and final stretch. But within this, I've got two stages in detail. The rest of them, I think we'll work on it later. The first one was very important for me. So the initial thrust should come to the studio instructor. I think all of us do that. We give them a write-up about the design project. But more than a write-up, I think we have to start engaging them in a discussion. And this discussion, this debate. I think students have forgotten how to debate in class. They're all really afraid of the teacher. So in the schooling system, the teacher is there in the pedestal, you're sitting behind, you can't ask too many questions. So that has to be completely disrupted. And so we have to make sure that we engage them in debate and discussion. So that is the job of the studio, design studio. It cannot necessarily happen in any other subjects. But so in the design studio, the discussion is core to the introduction. Then go site visits, but the site visits should be again intuitive and it should be done together, not separately. Then talk about issues, and again, this is an important point I want to make, that each stage we give them a set of issues to deal with, and that would be the guiding factor. So you look at them through that lens. So look at it as landscape, look at it as scale, look at adjacency. So these are guiding things that the team has to set up for them. And finally, you ask them mainly to do a collage. Because a collage, whether some people can sketch, they'll sketch and add it to the collage. Some people can just take photographs. Some people can write poems, whatever. So the collage is a good medium at this stage, and it does not have to be black and white. It should be a muddle, and I think the teachers should be able to understand that gray muddle and let it be at this stage. So the second, of course, is the case studies, and then in the case studies, I think you have to set out again a discussion. It's not very different from the site. We try to do the same thing, use a collage, and then after that I just said that all the other stages have to be dealt with in a similar manner. So a few key points. Basically involve the teachers who are teaching concurrent subjects, and so it's very relevant. Building construction services, materials have to come into the picture, because at an early stage you manage to reinforce to them that material relates to structure, structure relates to space, and so on and so forth. Let's not make the mistake that material is not part of it. And I think the last thing is that make them write a lot of notes. So I think this process of interaction should be productive. I mean, you cannot allow them not to have the basic set of drawings and discuss. So I think just a minute, my last slide. Okay, I think I don't have time much to talk about it, but overall I think if the whole issue-based idea can continue through various stages, it would be nice, and those guiding issues should be laid by the study team. Thank you.